Hello and welcome to the channel, my friends. It's Thunderbob here, and tonight we are going to talk about a franchise that is very close to my heart. Resident Evil. This is a series that has basically been there from my earliest gaming days. A series that has grown with me over the years, reinventing itself with each new release and with each new generation. Of all of the game series I have enjoyed over the decades, Resident Evil has the most impressive release cadence, while also maintaining a very high level of quality, with just a few missteps over the years. I've been playing these games at release for nearly 30 years now, but I've come to realize that while I've replayed a few of the games many times, like Resident Evil 4, there are a few that I've not played since that original release date many years ago, and there are at least two mainline games that I never actually completed. So my plan is to replay every mainline release in the series, including all of the numbered titles and the remakes. And I'm going to throw in Code Veronica and Revelations 1 and 2, even though it's debatable if those are mainline games. I'm going to play through the games in release order, and then put together a review and retrospective for each game individually. I intend to contrast my memories and feelings playing these games originally, years and decades ago, against how the games hold up today. I'm going to play through these games on the PC where available, and for the older titles with graphical mods to try to play these in the best possible light today. When I'm done with the entire series, I want to do a final video with my overall thoughts on the series and a ranking of all of the games. And a warning here, there will be some spoilers, but let's go ahead and get started. Tonight we're going to be talking about Resident Evil Code Veronica. This was a 1999 Dreamcast release, and was the first Resident Evil released for that new generation of consoles. This is a game that I had limited exposure to growing up. I remember reading an article about it at the time in a magazine, and they were pushing it as the next mainline game in the series, but I was suspicious because it wasn't a numbered entry like the games that had preceded it. Around Christmas of '99, I had a choice from my parents of getting a new PC or a Dreamcast, and I ended up choosing the PC, missed out on this game for many years after that, but I did end up getting Half-Life and StarCraft, so I guess it was a win for me that Christmas. I ended up picking up a GameCube a few years later, and I got the Code Veronica port, and I played it. I didn't beat it like Zero, if you watch that video. I got a few hours into it, and it just wasn't clicking with me. I was playing Resident Evil Remake, Resident Evil 0, and 4 at that time, and Code Veronica just felt a bit archaic by that point, even just a few years later. And I think I fell off it for a couple of reasons. The main one probably is just the difficulty. Not necessarily the combat, but more the complexity of the game. This is a big game with a ton of puzzles, and it's very easy to get stuck. It's also very easy to soft lock yourself, where you don't bring the right item or the right weapon, and you basically have to load an old save or just start over. I think that's what happened. I think I got stuck somewhere, and I just gave up on it. It was also a bit archaic by the time I was playing it. Resident Evil Remake and 0 were all fixed camera angles like this, but seemed so much more advanced than this game. And I was playing Resident Evil 4, I think, at the time, and that's just a whole nother generation ahead of this. And it makes it harder to go back. I mean, today, I'm a lot more forgiving, and I can go back and play these games and kind of respect them for what they were doing at the time. But I feel like I was less forgiving in my teen years for older games. If it wasn't on the new game system I just got, it wasn't worth playing in my eyes. So now, 2 decades later, I'm finally finishing this game. And I do want to mention to start with, I'm a little bit late on this video. I was attempting to go through the series chronologically. I ended up having some trouble getting this game running optimally, and I skipped it, and I went ahead and I played the Resident Evil Remake and 0, and then I finally got this working in a decent fashion, and I came back and I played through it. So it skewed my my thoughts on these games a little bit, because I'm playing 0 and Code Veronica back to back, which are probably some of the weakest games in the series for me personally. They're not bad, but they're on the lower end of the scale. And it was a little bit of a trudge getting through these two games back to back. So I want to just take a minute here to talk about how I'm playing this today. I'm trying to play through these all on the PC, but Code Veronica never received an official PC port. It's never been re-released on PC. So initially I tried to play the PlayStation 5 version, which is basically, it's just the PlayStation 4 version, which is a re-release of the PlayStation 2 version with no graphical updates and a few problems of its own. And then I didn't really like the way it played and how it looked, and I wasn't able to get good footage of it. So I decided, let's try to emulate it. So I looked, there's been multiple re-releases of this. It seemed like the PlayStation 3 version was maybe the best option because they redid the game, they up-res the graphics, they redid all the lighting in the game. The problem was, when I booted it up, it's very dark and muddy. For whatever reason, they give you a lighter pretty early on, and without that lighter, some of these areas are just pitch black, and it made for very terrible recordings for the video, and I didn't like the look of it. Like, they up-resed it to some extent, but it actually looked inferior to the GameCube or Dreamcast version, in my opinion. So then I ended up doing more Google searching, and I found actually that someone had taken the GameCube version and redone every texture in the game. And so I installed Dolphin emulator, and I installed this texture pack, and then I pushed the graphics basically up to about 4K, and it looks pretty good. It's not as complex as that PlayStation 3 version. The lighting is more simplistic, but it's not dark and muddy, and I could actually see what's happening. So if you're wondering how to best play this today, unless they've come with a remaster or remake since this video was put together, I would recommend that GameCube version through Dolphin with the texture packs and with the resolution bumped as hard as you can with your computer. And I gotta say, even with all the effort I put in to get the best looking and playing version, this is still a bad looking game. In fact, I would say I like the look of the original trilogy better than this game. The main culprit is this game retains the fixed camera angles of the earlier era, but it's the first game to use 3D polygonal backgrounds instead of detailed 2D backgrounds. The textures and the level of detail feel severely reduced, even though this game was released a generation after the original trilogy. It just comes across as very simplistic when you compare it to the streets of Resident Evil Nemesis and the insane amount of destruction and clutter filling the streets. It just feels very basic here. And the only real benefit they get from switching from the 2D backdrops to these 3D backdrops is now the camera will sometimes shift with you instead of bouncing from one static position to another. So as you're moving through a scene, the camera will actually kind of dynamically move. You can't control it, it's all still fixed, but the camera will move along with you. Most of the time it is fixed angles, but this does happen occasionally. And I gotta say, the trade-off just really is not worth it. When you look at what Capcom was able to accomplish with Resident Evil Remake and Resident Evil 0, those games just look beautiful, those pre-rendered backgrounds, especially when you up-res them with today's HD remaster on the PC. Resident Evil 0 is arguably one of the best-looking games in the series, and it's 20 years old. And this game is only 3 years older, and it looks like garbage. I don't think the Dreamcast was powerful enough to replicate the look and feel of those older Resident Evil games with 3D environments. And I think Resident Evil 4 is probably the first game in the series to make the argument for the retirement of those fixed camera angles and the 2D backgrounds from those previous games. Now, the gameplay is very similar to the other titles of this era. It has tank controls, limited camera movements. I would say the game continued the trajectory from those previous games and is pushing more action than horror. There are a lot of enemies on the screen here, and at times you really feel like you need to clear some of the rooms to proceed. When you are firing a pair of submachine guns at 2 enemies at the same time, it does feel pretty badass, though. There are still moments where you can run around enemies, and a few situations where you're weaponless and you have no choice, but overall the level action here is pretty high. Now let's talk about the story and the structure of the game. There's a lot here. I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly. But you start as Claire Redfield, who is captured at the start of the game in a really ridiculous cutscene. She then wakes up inside an umbrella prison on a remote island that's been attacked and overrun by zombies and other bioweapons. You then explore the prison. You meet this 17-year-old kid named Steve, perhaps the most annoying character in the history of the Resident Evil series.
Wait, don't shoot! Sorry about that little misunderstanding, but I thought you were another one of those
Shut up. Make one wrong move and I'll shoot.
Relax, beautiful. I said I was sorry. My name's Steve.
There's some freedom in the order that you explore these areas, as the game is broken up into several connected locations, and the items that you're required to solve puzzles are spread across them, more so than in the previous games. So I explored a few areas of the prison, including a graveyard, a bunkhouse, and an annoying hall that makes you leave all of your metal items behind. And you end up dealing with this multiple times. It's pretty tedious. You cross a bridge, which leads to the palace. This feels like a classic Resident Evil mansion, but overall the 3D graphics here make it a downgrade to any of the similar locations in the previous games. You meet Alfred Ashford.
Redfield! How dare you interfere with my operation?
What are you talking about?
You let yourself be captured so you could lead your people to this base!
I have no idea what you're babbling about.
You don't fool me! I am Alfred Ashford, commander of this base.
Who is always pointing a rifle at you. And he reminds me of that guy from Jumanji, you know, the one that was always chasing Robin Williams. You watch this really creepy video of two twins that is maybe the scariest moment in the entire game. You solve some puzzles here, and you ride a freaking submarine. This takes you to an airport, which you briefly explore, raising an elevator where these zombies attack you in a cool moment. The areas all feel pretty small, and you can only access a limited amount of the rooms before you need to backtrack with some newly found item. I went back toward the prison, but found the entrance to the military training facility. And after another run-in with Alfred, you explore several levels of this facility, and you run into a new enemy, the Bandersnatch. These stretchy assholes show up a lot in the game, and I just generally try to run from them as they're pretty slow, but they do have very long stretchy arms, and sometimes they do catch you. And from the training facility, you make your way to the Residence, which is this creepy Norman Bates-style psycho mansion that is maybe the best looking area in the game. You meet Alexia, who appears to be Alfred's twin sister, and they're the same creepy kids from that video you watched earlier. There's also some weird notes you find, and kind of a weird, sick incest vibe I got from these two weirdos. You weave your way back and forth between the prison, the palace, the airport, the residence, a few more times, trying to find a method for escape. And you find out that Alexia might not be real, but rather Alfred is cross-dressing as his sister. Finally, you get an airplane running and you escape just before the island is destroyed. But in the air, you have a boss fight against the Tyrant, like something right out of Aliens. You blow the Tyrant out the back of the plane, but then the plane is controlled by an outside force, and it crashes into an Antarctic base. This is an umbrella base that is also surprisingly overrun by zombies and other creatures already. You explore the abandoned facility and run into these really annoying moths. This might be the most annoying enemy in the game. They poison you. They also infect you with these larvae that after a couple of minutes will hatch and poison you. You can kill them, but they respawn frequently. So every time you go through this hall, which, by the way, is right outside of the save zone, you're probably going to get poisoned unless you run really fast and are able to avoid them. You eventually find a way to escape and reach another base, but you're attacked by another boss, the Nosferatu. Alfred shows up, and it turns out that his sister is real, but she's been in cryostasis, or some other such nonsense. Claire and Steve are attacked, and then the game shifts to Chris Redfield's perspective, who's just arrived at the island that you had just left as Claire, and you basically have to do all this bullshit over again. And if you remember, this is only the second appearance of Chris in the mainline series at this point. He was in the original Resident Evil, and then he disappeared until Code Veronica. He's been in almost all the more recent games, but in this era, this would have been really exciting to me as a kid. I don't think I got this far. I'm pretty sure I didn't reach Antarctica or Chris's section as a kid, but it's pretty exciting seeing him in the game. So you show up on the island as Chris without much gear, but you find a item box pretty quickly, and somehow, even though Claire is on another continent, you have access to all of her gear, which is really nice. And you are back on the island, and you go back through many of the same areas that Claire has explored, but now the island has been destroyed, and there are new routes and some blocked areas. You do fight a giant worm called the Gulp Worm. That reminds me a lot of the Gravedigger from Resident Evil Nemesis. Also, there's an aquatic boss named the Albinoid that is probably the most annoying and also easiest boss in the game. It never attacks you, and the entire fight is just you moving around the outside of an enclosure, trying to shoot it without getting shot. It's, I don't know, it is just a bad fight. Like most of the boss fights in this game, just not a good fight. You eventually find out that Claire has already fled the island, but you manage to secure a fighter jet and follow after her. So Chris, maybe after an hour or two, reaches the Antarctic base. And again, you cover a lot of the same ground, but there are some new unexplored areas. And you fight a giant spider, or you can avoid it. I actually just ran away from it and I never had to fight it. A lot of the rooms here are now frozen because when Claire escaped, she let a bunch of water into the base, and now there's ice and water everywhere. And you find a few rooms that are eerily similar to the mansion from Resident Evil 1, including a one-for-one recreation of the main hall and a duplicate of the residence from the earlier island. So finally, after what, a couple of games and a bunch of off-screen searching, these siblings are finally reunited, and Claire potentially was poisoned. In my run, she was during the Nosferatu fight, and Chris has to make a quick run and get a potion for her, a cure for her. And then, like always happens, they get separated. They get attacked by Alexia, and Wesker's there. It's a pretty cool fight scene. Claire actually has a run-in with Steve, and you have to fight him. He gets mutated into like a Hulk-like creature that I've heard is a really hard fight. For me, I literally just ran away from him and he died. It wasn't very difficult. And then in the same exact moment, it's kind of happening concurrently, Chris is observing a fight between Alexia and Wesker, who showed up a few times throughout the game. And Wesker eventually kind of runs away. He's a punk here. And then you have to fight Alexia, and you take her down. And then you have a couple of additional fights against her. She's got like 3 different phases where she changes things up, and you have to fight her while Claire is setting up the thing that will kill her, basically. And after you beat Alexia, the island is being destroyed. There's a final showdown that you don't actually control at all. It's non-playable. A showdown between Chris and Wesker that really sets up the eventual rematch in Resident Evil 5. And finally, Chris and Claire escape together and vow to take down Umbrella. Cue up Resident Evil 5. So I've read that this game is the most difficult game in the series, but I didn't have as much trouble as I was expecting. Early on, I found the knife was very powerful and used it on many of the earlier enemies, and ended up with kind of a glut of ammunition by the end. There are a few points where the game forces you to switch characters, and I've read that you can soft lock yourself, like if you don't leave the right weapons in the item box when you get transferred over to Chris. Like, the game gives you a no warning. So if you had picked up all your best weapons on Claire and it switches over, yeah, you could kind of screw yourself, and you'd have to go back pretty far to fix this problem. And there are a few situations like that where the game just suddenly shifts perspective and you don't have any time to make sure your characters have the right items. There's also, later in the game, fewer and fewer save rooms, it feels like, and they're spread apart and just not in great areas. And you can lose some progress by either dying or just like not having the right setup in the place you need it. I'd also say a lot of the enemies are annoying, like more annoying and hard. More annoying than hard or scary. And it reminds me a bit of Resident Evil 0 in the same way, where there was like a bunch of new enemies introduced that were really bullet sponges, and they were just annoying. And I didn't really find any of the puzzles terribly difficult. What I did find difficult was figuring out where to use the many kind of story-related items the game gives you. There are times where, you might have 6 different progression-related items in your storage box with no clear idea where you need them. And I did end up consulting a guide a few times where I'm just like, I don't know where to go from here. This is a very complex, crazy game. And I find that's probably why I fell off it as a kid. They'll give you so many items, and almost every time you'll find an item, in the palace, and you realize you need to take it to the very beginning of the prison that you woke up in, and then that opens up and gives you an item that you need to take to the airport, which is on the other side of the palace, and you go back and forth. It's just a frustrating amount of backtracking in this game. And, there are like 4 different areas open to you on the island that you're exploring at the same time, and they drip feed you these items. And nearly every time, it's a walk to the very far end of the facility to progress the story. And I ended up consulting a guide a few times, like I said. And I think the most frustrating thing is when you finally escape the island, you think, all this backtracking is over. You're in Antarctica. You're in the end game. You spend like an hour in Antarctica, only for the game to return you back to the island as Chris for like another 2 hours. And you explore the same areas again with the same problems in my mind. And it kind of just overstays its welcome. The puzzles themselves were pretty simplistic, though. Like the actual, pick the right thing here, it's almost always very simple. Doesn't require a guide for that, but knowing where to use the stuff it gives you, that's the hardest part. So the game does kind of overstay its welcome. Took me maybe 9 hours on my first playthrough. That was the longest game in the series up to this point, for sure. But it feels like there's just not enough content, enough unique locations, enough new mechanics to keep the game fresh for that long. I contrast this against Resident Evil 4, which is probably the longest game in the series, which is twice as long as Code Veronica at least. It continually introduces new areas, new enemies, weapons, while also having much more enjoyable combat. And I don't want that game to end. I can play that game for 15-20 hours, and I want to keep going. Whereas Code Veronica, I was done with it really before I even transitioned to playing as Chris. So I'm mixed on this game. I think the game looks terrible and is perhaps my least favorite game visually in the series. But the gameplay overall is fine. The moment-to-moment gameplay here feels pretty smooth, as long as you're used to the tank controls. The game is overly large, complex, tedious, and frustratingly long. I would have preferred if they just let Chris show up at Antarctica, instead of revisiting the island and playing through that whole section again. The game can be difficult, but mostly it is because it's possible to softlock yourself at certain points, because the game does not telegraph when you're going to change characters or when you're moving into a boss fight. The story leans far into the silly origins of the series, but I think it crosses over into legitimate bad instead of fun bad. Overall, this is one of my least favorite games in the series, but I think it is a game that's ripe for both a remake and a remaster. It's rather difficult to get this game running today on PC, and the available options on consoles are not great. A faithful remaster, plus a full-blown remake to fix some of the more glaring issues, would be much welcomed here. Should you play this today? I would say it is skippable, unless you really want to see the backstory to Resident Evil 5, or your favorite aspect of the series is backtracking. So I'm going to end my review there. I do appreciate everyone who watches my videos, who leaves a comment, who likes or subscribes, and if you want to see more, I'll try to have another video up here in the next several weeks. Thanks again, and have a good night.